Hello and welcome back to the London History Podcast. I am your host, Hazel Baker from londonguidedwalks.co.uk. And today we're embarking on a delicious journey through nearly 1,000 years of London's feasting traditions, from the grand medieval banquets in Guildhall's Great Hall to the bustling Christmas markets of Smithfield and Leadenhall. We'll explore how food has shaped our city's social fabric, reflected its wealth and power, and created traditions that endure to this day. So, pour yourself a cup of tea, or perhaps a glass of mulled wine if you're feeling festive, and join me as we feast our way through London's tasty culinary history. Let's begin our story in the year 1411 in the City of London, where Master Mason John Croxton is overseeing the construction of one of England's most important civic banqueting spaces, the Great Hall of Guildhall. Picture the magnificent structure rising from the medieval streets, 153 feet long, around 50 feet high, with walls 5 feet thick. This wasn't simply a building, it was a statement. The merchant guilds of London were declaring their wealth, their power, and their intention to rival even the great halls of royalty. And what better way to display that power than through the most elaborate feasts medieval England had ever seen? These weren't your typical dinner parties, listeners. The grandest feasts at Guildhall could take months of planning. They featured multiple courses, typically 3 to 4, though royal banquets might extend to 6 or more, each separated by entertainment. Can you imagine? Between each course, guests might be treated to musicians, acrobats, or even elaborate theatrical performances. But let's talk about the food itself. Every banquet began with pottage, a hearty soup or stew that was far more sophisticated than it might sound. Made from boiled vegetables, leftover meat, herbs and pulses like beans and lentils, it was thickened with ingredients such as cabbage, leeks, onions and garlic. This wasn't peasant food. This was the medieval equivalent of a carefully crafted starter course. Then came the spectacle. Picture whole joints of meat gleaming with expensive sauces. Rabbit, beef, pork, mutton, deer and wild boar graced these tables. But the truly impressive displays featured wild birds, duck, chicken, pigeons, geese, pheasants and partridges. For the most adventurous feasts, diners might encounter heron, crane and even peacock, often presented whole, with their feathers reattached for dramatic effect. And here's something that might surprise you. These banquets weren't just about showing off. They were about power, politics, and diplomacy. The use of expensive spices like saffron, ginger, cinnamon, cloves, and nutmeg didn't just make the food taste better, it demonstrated the host's international trade connections. Those imported dried fruits, figs, dates, and raisins told guests that this was an institution which reached across continents. Even the presentation was political. Meat was often served in pies that were literally gilded in silver or gold. Imagine the candlelight catching those gleaming surfaces as servants carried them into the hall. Every detail was calculated to inspire awe, respect, and perhaps just a touch of intimidation. The Lord Mayor's Banquet is widely regarded as the City of London's longest-running civic banquet, first held at Guildhall in 1502 and continued annually ever since. Every November, the Great Hall of Guildhall, the same hall where those medieval merchant princes held their elaborate feasts, hosts the Lord Mayor's Banquet to mark the start of the new Lord Mayor's year. This magnificent event has hosted monarchs and foreign dignitaries and includes the Prime Minister's keynote foreign policy speech, keeping alive that historic link between city ceremony and national politics. The atmosphere during these modern banquets still evokes the hall's medieval heritage. Guests dine beneath Gothic stained glass windows bearing the names and arms of past Lord Mayors, and while statues of the mythical giants Gog and Magog look down from their lofty perches. The hall can accommodate up to around 700 guests for banquets, maintaining its role as one of London's premier civic entertaining spaces. Samuel Pepys, the famous diarist, dined at Guildhall, recording Lord Mayor's feasts in his diary, and Charles II attended great civic banquets there as the restored monarchy re-engaged with the city. The tradition of medieval state banquets reached a late Victorian high point, with events such as Queen Victoria's 1900 celebration at Guildhall, welcoming soldiers home from the Boer War. Yet the custom continues today, adapted for modern times, but still defined by that essential connection between food, power, and hospitality that has shaped these occasions for more than 500 years. Now, let us fast forward through the centuries to explore the remarkable evolution of one of Britain's most beloved Christmas traditions, the Christmas pudding. But to understand where it all began, we must travel back to the medieval kitchens of London and to the humble origins of something called frumenty. Frumenty, or fermenty, as it was sometimes spelled, was a medieval dish made from hulled wheat, boiled in milk or broth, sometimes sweetened and spiced with ingredients such as sugar and cinnamon in richer households. Imagine a warm, thick porridge enriched with flavours that were, at the time, highly prized. Londoners enjoyed versions of this dish in both modest homes and grand houses alike, with variations reflecting status and wealth. By the later Middle Ages and into the early modern period, frumenty had evolved into plum pottage, often served at Christmas and sometimes known as Christmas porridge. But here's a crucial point. When historical recipes mention plums, they didn't mean the purple fruit that we know today. Plum was simply a generic term for dried fruits, such as raisins, currants, or prunes. Plum pottage was a curious mixture of sweet and savoury ingredients. Recipes from the period included beef or mutton broth combined with breadcrumbs, dried fruit, wine or ale, and sugar or honey, thickened with flour or grains and bound with suet. Later, English cookbooks describe Christmas pottages began with rich meat stock and built up layers of fruit and spice, creating something substantial and almost meat-like, far removed from the sweet steamed pudding we know today. By the 16th century and beyond, the dish had begun to firm up, evolving into what became known as figgy pudding, the very pudding celebrated in carols. Instead of a loose pottage simmering in an open cauldron, the mixture was boiled or steamed in a cloth or basin, creating a dense, rich texture. Over time, the combination of sweet fruits and spices began to dominate, while meat gradually receded into the background. London played a key role in this evolution. The city's merchants imported the finest ingredients, raisins and currants from the Mediterranean and Iberia, figs from warmer climates, citrus peel and later citrus fruits from overseas, and spices from Asia and beyond. Each pudding was, in a sense, a miniature map of the world, its flavours charting trade routes and imperial reach. But it was in the 18th century that the Christmas pudding became a truly festive symbol. Sweetness dominated, and brandy and other spirits were added for flavour and for preservation. Many families would prepare their puddings on Stir-Up Sunday, the last Sunday before Advent, inspired by the "Stir up, we beseech thee" collect at the start of the service. Each family member would take a turn stirring the mixture, often from east to west, in honour of the Magi's journey, and make a wish. The act of stirring became ceremonial, almost ritualistic, linking kitchen work to spiritual reflection. The Victorian period, of course, cemented the pudding's place in Christmas tradition. Charles Dickens, in A Christmas Carol, painted an unforgettable picture of the Christmas pudding, a dark, glossy, rounded shape brought in blazing with burning brandy and crowned with a sprig of holly. He captured not just the visual spectacle, but also the sense of occasion, the care, and the domestic pride inherent in the making of a Christmas pudding. Victorian Londoners also added an element of chance and fortune. Silver coins and tiny charms hidden in the pudding were said to bring luck, or other fates, to whomever found them. Drawing on older customs of concealing tokens in festive dishes, the pudding was no longer merely food. It had become entertainment, ritual, and a statement of both wealth and creativity. Consider the aroma of a Victorian London kitchen in December, the sharp tang of warm brandy, the heady fragrance of nutmeg, cinnamon, and clove mingling with raisins, currants, and suet, steam rising from the boiling basin, and children watching anxiously as the family took turns to stir the mixture and make a wish. The act of creating a pudding became a sensory and social experience, bringing households together in anticipation of the feast yet to come. While we've explored Christmas pudding, we must now turn ourselves to another classic festival treat, the mince pie. And dear listeners, if you could travel back to medieval or early modern London and see the original Christmas pies, you'd barely recognise them. These were not the sweet round pastries we know today. Early mince pies were substantial and often oblong pastries, and they're said to be shaped like mangers and sometimes decorated with pastry figures of the Christ child. Many later writers claimed that they contained 13 ingredients representing Jesus and his 12 disciples, making each pie a little edible nativity story. But there's a twist. These early mince pies contained actual minced meat, commonly mutton, beef, or veal, combined with dried fruits, suet, and sugar or honey. The sweet and savoury combination was typical of medieval and Tudor cuisine, and it would certainly surprise modern palates. Early English recipes instruct cooks to mince meat finely, mix it with currants and raisins, sugar and spices, and bake it in a rich pastry case as a Christmas pie. The pastry crusts, known as coffins, were often thick, sturdy containers designed to hold the rich filling. In wealthier households, diners sometimes focused on the meat and fruit mixture and left much of the crust, while leftovers might find their way to servants or to the poor, turning this opulent dish into an act of charity. During the Tudor period, mince pies retained their religious associations, but became ever more elaborate. Spices, cinnamon, cloves, nutmeg were later explained as symbols of the gifts of the wise men, while the meat recalled the shepherd's offerings. Some pies presented in ornate, sometimes gilded pastry coffins for ceremonial occasions, transforming the humble pie into a showpiece of faith and festivity. Londoners in the 16th and 17th centuries could purchase mince pies at bustling markets such as Leadenhall, Smithfield and Cheapside, where bakers and pie sellers did a roaring trade alongside butchers and grocers. Imagine the streets at Christmas, a mingled aroma of sweet and savoury pastry rising from the stalls, the smoke of roasting chestnuts, and the sharp scent of livestock and leather from the markets all around. The tradition from meat-heavy to mostly fruit-filled pies occurred gradually over the centuries. As sugar became cheaper in the 18th century, mince pies grew steadily sweeter. Meat shifted from lamb or veal to tongue or beef, and by the late Victorian period, many recipes dropped meat altogether, leaving a rich mixture of dried fruits, spices, and suet. The familiar round shape replaced the older oblong manger pies, reflecting a general move away from explicit nativity symbolism after the Reformation. By the Victorian era, mince pies had become a festive indulgence rather than a sacred offering. They appeared on middle-class tables and at royal celebrations alike, and writers such as Charles Dickens helped to cement them in the public imagination as an essential part of the Christmas feast. The sweet aroma of sweet-laden mincemeat, the sight of steaming pies cooling on windowsills, and the act of sharing them with family and neighbours became a hallmark of the London festive season. Even today, when you bite into a mince pie in December, you are tasting centuries of culinary and cultural evolution, rooted in London's early kitchens, shaped by trade and empire, and transformed by domestic ritual. In many ways, the history of the mince pie mirrors the broader story of London itself, a city that embraces change, blends influences from across the world, and transforms everyday life into something extraordinary. Now let us step beyond the grand halls and into the bustling streets of London, where ordinary Londoners procured the ingredients for their festive feasts. Two markets stand out as pillars of the city's culinary life. Today, we'll focus first on Smithfield, a market with close to 1,000 years of history as a place of livestock and meat. The name Smithfield is thought to derive from the Saxon Smethfeld, meaning smooth field, describing a flat, open area on the edge of the city, stretching towards the valley of the River Fleet. In the late 12th century, the writer William Fitzstephen described a smooth field outside the walls, where on certain days fine horses were shown and sold, alongside pigs, cows, and oxen of impressive size. It was already a place of animals, spectacle, and trade. Imagine medieval London, when livestock arrived from the countryside. Cattle, pigs, and sheep were driven along dusty roads from regions such as the Midlands into the city, herded through the gates and into Smithfield, where they might be rested, sold, and slaughtered, or passed on to butchers serving Eastcheap or other markets. The noise and the smells, the clatter of hooves, the shouts of drovers and butchers, the bleating and bellowing of animals must have been quite overwhelming. Victorian observers later described the ground as almost ankle-deep in filth and mire, with the cries of cattle and the calls of traders merging into a deafening roar. Smithfield became especially lively at Christmas. Accounts of the market speak of Christmas-time displays of overfed cattle and flocks of birds destined for festive tables, trussed and decorated to catch the eye of passing customers. Crowds would gather to see the best beasts brought in for the season of abundance and celebration, turning the business of buying meat into a kind of winter pageant. By the 18th century, Smithfield was not only a site of commerce, but also of spectacle and logistics on a vast scale. Writers of the time recorded enormous numbers of poultry being driven towards London for the Christmas trade. One described hundreds of droves of birds, altogether well over 1,000 in a single season, trudging along the roads. Their feet were sometimes dipped in a mixture of tar and sand to protect them on the long journey, a small but telling detail of the ingenuity required to feed a growing metropolis. The market underwent a dramatic transformation in the 19th century. The live cattle market was removed from Smithfield in the 1850s, and in its place a new dead meat market was built. Victorian architect Sir Horace Jones designed the iron and glass halls that still define the site, with the main meat market opened in 1868 and further buildings added in the 1870s. Beneath the market floor, railway tunnels allowed carcasses to be brought directly into the halls from the goods depots. Perfect marriage of engineering and commerce. The poultry market, rebuilt after a devastating fire and reopened in the early 1960s, featured a remarkable concrete shell roof. At the time, one of the largest clear-spanning domed roofs of its kind in Europe. It was a bold, modern answer to a very old problem: how to shelter vast quantities of food whilst keeping the space bright, airy and efficient. Smithfield was always more than bricks and iron, though. It was a place where all levels of society intersected. Merchants haggled over carcasses, apprentices fetching poultry for their masters, and Londoners of many classes crowding the stalls to choose their Christmas meat. 19th century commentators noted that rich and poor alike jostled through the same alleys, sniffing, examining and bargaining in scenes that were both chaotic and festive. Christmas at Smithfield, like the great feasts we explored earlier, had its own elements of ceremony. Prime cattle and birds were displayed with particular care. The weighing, carving and selection of the best cuts followed a practiced choreography. It was London theatre at its most practical. Commerce, celebration and social life all playing out under the same iron roof. By walking through Smithfield today, even as its role is currently changing and its location, you can imagine the echoes of the centuries, the stamping of hooves on the cobbles, the murmur of bargaining, the clink of scales, the smell of raw meat and roasting joints drifting from the taverns around, and also the chatter of families preparing for Christmas. For hundreds of years, this market had been one of the beating hearts of London's festive provisioning. While Smithfield focused on livestock, Leadenhall Market became London's premier destination for prepared foods, poultry and luxury provisions. Its history stretches back to Roman London, and when you walk through the covered Victorian Market today, you are treading above what was once the Roman Forum and Basilica complex, the largest of its kind in Roman Britain and among the largest north of the Alps. This connection to 2 millennia of commerce gives Leadenhall a unique gravitas among London markets. The market takes its name from a medieval lead-roofed manor house that once occupied the site, but its commercial significance grew when Richard Whittington, aka Dick Whittington, the legendary Lord Mayor of London, secured the lease in 1408 and handed the freehold to the city around 1411. By the mid-15th century, his successor, Simon Eyre, had funded a public granary, market buildings, school and chapel, turning Leadenhall into the city's go-to place for poultry, cheese, eggs, spices and fine foods. One of the most fascinating stories associated with Leadenhall involves Old Tom the Gander. Arriving from Ostend in 1797, Old Tom survived when it was said that over 2 days some 34,000 geese were slaughtered for the market, and quickly became a beloved character. He was fed at local inns, particularly the Lamb Tavern, and when he died in 1835, he reportedly even received an obituary in the Times. And you can hear more about him and other characters of Leadenhall Market in episode 102, Characters of Leadenhall Market. The market's logistics were remarkable. Contemporary accounts describe Norfolk turkeys and geese arriving in numbers unrivalled, often hundreds of miles from their origin. Birds would take the slow march into the city, a journey that could take weeks if not months. Writers such as Daniel Defoe describe these droves moving slowly along the roads, sometimes no more than a mile an hour, allowing them to arrive in prime condition for Christmas sales. The scale and coordination required for London's festive poultry trade was staggering, making Leadenhall a hive of activity and anticipation during December. Victorian Leadenhall combined commerce with spectacle. Merchants displayed their best poultry and provisions under gaslight and later electric lighting, alongside festive greenery and decorative arches. One Victorian observer described the blaze of light amid which the goods were exhibited The aroma of roasting chestnuts and spiced wine, and the hum of eager buyers calling the market a scene worthy of the season itself. Leadenhall was not just about food. It was a place of social encounter. Traders, apprentices, buyers, and even aristocrats mingled amid the hustle. Tales of arguments, deals struck, and the occasional festive brawl are recorded in newspapers of the time, reminding us that markets were as much theatre as they were commerce. And for Londoners, Christmas at Leadenhall was about abundance. Wealthy families might purchase turkeys, geese, or exotic game, while working-class households bought pies, mince fillings, and preserved meats. The market provided the ingredients for festive rituals echoed throughout households, roasting the perfect bird, preparing puddings, and arranging the Christmas table. Walking through Leadenhall today, you can feel its history. The cobbled floors, the wrought iron arches, and the painted ceilings evoke centuries of commerce, celebration, and community. Food and markets can be staged for display and abundance, echoing the grandeur of Guildhall banquets and great Christmas tables of the elite. The same foods, turkeys, pies, puddings, carry different meanings depending on who eats them. As we reach the end of our journey through London's feasting traditions, I'm struck by how these stories connect past and present in the most intimate way possible, through the universal experience of sharing food. The transformation of dishes like Christmas pudding and mince pies, from medieval pottages and meat pies to medieval sweets and today's familiar desserts, reflects broader changes in British society, trade and empire. The great markets of Smithfield and Leadenhall have evolved from medieval livestock trading grounds into sophisticated food distribution hubs, and who knows what the future will hold for them. Perhaps most remarkably, these traditions show how food serves not merely as sustenance, but as a powerful expression of community, celebration, and continuity. There are lots of other food or Christmas-related podcast episodes that you may enjoy, including episode 34, London's Old Shops, Food and Drink Edition, episode 98, Christmas Puddings Through History, episode 75, The Christmas Cracker, a Victorian Invention, episode 100, Christmas Words, episode 99, Royal Christmas Speech, a Modern Tradition, episode 74, Christmas in Post-War London, episode 35, A Tudor Christmas, and our previous episode, 144, Who was Ebenezer Scrooge? I'm Hazel Baker, and this has been the London History Podcast from londonguidedwalks.co.uk. Next time, we'll be exploring another fascinating corner of the city's past, something to do with Tower Bridge. But until then, happy feasting, and remember, every meal in London is a taste of history. Until next time.